It was, I guess, about a year and a half ago. I was asking my wife and Brenda if they remembered. The family had all gone to dinner at Alki Point, and while we were at dinner, Jackie pulled me aside, and she said, "Would you speak at my memorial service?" As a pastor, I get asked to speak at lots of things. That kind of goes with the territory. But when someone asks me to speak at their own memorial, that takes on special significance. I've thought about it a lot. I've loved Jackie over the years, like so many of you have already shared. And I've asked myself, what do you say as one who is still living on behalf of one who has died? What is the final peal of the bell that should be sounded? And if you'll permit me, I don't normally just speak from a manuscript, but I'm going to do that because as I've written my thoughts down, I think it'll be most clear that way. I asked Jackie if there was anything special she wanted me to say. She said, "Talk about Jesus." Jackie's faith in Jesus was the animating principle of her life. It is mine as well. It has not always been that way. In fact, events like this, death, pain, tragedy, at one time were so distressful to me that I walked away from ministry. I almost walked away from God. There were years of questioning everything from his very existence to the problem of pain in a world supposedly made by a good creator. In that season, I could hardly bear anything that smacked of bad news. A tough place to be since the world is full of bad news. Some of the voices that helped me were people who had faced far more trauma than I. Gary Sitzer was a professor at Whitworth College. He was behind the wheel when an accident occurred that took the life of his wife, his mother, and their 4-year-old daughter. Gary's a very thoughtful man and writer, and he journaled through that experience and ultimately wrote a book titled A Grace Disguised. Like me, part of his response to tragedy and death was a struggle to know if faith in God made sense. That perhaps God should be eliminated. Maybe life without a supposedly good creator would make more sense out of a pain-filled world. But as he thought and searched, he came to a realization, an evidence of God hidden even within his sorrow. This is what he wrote. "The soul suffers because bad has appeared to triumph over good. It is the existence of God that provides categories by which we make moral judgments and respond with appropriate emotions. We have good reason to mourn losses. Tears at a funeral manifest sadness in the face of legitimate loss. What we lost was good. What we lost rightfully makes us feel bad about the loss. The system of meaning that makes us feel bad about the loss and that gives us the right to feel bad reflects a universe that has God at the center of it." I agree. While I cannot explain all of the whys of evil in the world, the very fact that I understand and identify evil as such is evidence of the existence of real and transcendent good. Not an ethereal idea floated out of my preferences, but a real good that allows me to unequivocally identify other things as truly bad, evil, not right. For such good to exist, there must be one who is good. And yet, when I was in that dark place, there were many days when good seemed like a faraway concept. Nights when I feared my soul would never see sun again. One of King David's most loved songs is Psalm 23. He says in part, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. He makes me lay down in green pastures. He restores my soul. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Grief leads us into that valley of the shadow of death, but upon entry, it often seems like a box canyon, a dead end with no way out. As far as we can look ahead, all we see is the shadow of death. However, David makes the observation that on the passage through, we do not go alone. In fact, when the full counsel of Scripture is taken into account, we realize that the one who goes with us has already passed through this valley before and knows the way. John 11:35 is the shortest verse in the Bible. It says simply, Jesus wept. The story surrounding those two little words is surprising. Jesus' close friend Lazarus had been very sick, and his sisters had sent a messenger desperately asking Jesus to come. And yet John tells us that Jesus delayed coming. It was as though he was waiting for something greater than meeting the immediate health need of his friend. And then Lazarus died. And only then did Jesus go. Lazarus' sisters and Jesus' disciples were stunned. He could so easily have healed. Why wait until it was too late? Upon arriving, Jesus, who had seemed passive up to this point, suddenly strikes a very different demeanor. John 11, starting at verse 32, says, "Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.' When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, 'Where have you laid him?' They said, 'Lord, come and see.' Jesus wept." Those standing near, witnessing his tears, had two observations. First, the Jews standing there said, "See how he loved him." But some of them, and this is probably the more probing observation, asked a question. Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? They had seen Jesus do miracles. Why no miracle here? Why not come sooner and stop something that obviously was causing Jesus personal pain? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why would a good person, the goodest person, the one with proven power to heal, let them happen? If you know the end of the story, it becomes evident why Jesus was willing, chose to, wait. At the occasion of Lazarus' death, he was going to give a glimpse, through the experience of this one friend, what his ultimate desire was for all. He was going to call Lazarus forth, return him to life and love. It would be shocking, joyous, astounding. Of course, the bystanders knew nothing of what their immediate future held in store. If they had, they might have asked another question. Not, why did you let it happen? But why cry when a party is about to break out? This account of Jesus' tears actually points to the reality of the incident. If someone were just concocting a fable, there are numerous ways it would make more sense to develop the story. Perhaps Jesus smiled to himself. Jesus shushed the mourners. Jesus rebuked them for their weak faith. And yet that's not what the text says. As others have observed, what we have here is a record of a real event. The response of Jesus may seem at odds with the carefully crafted narrative, but this is not a shaped fiction or legend. It is the record of what really happened. And what happened in that moment was that Jesus was overwhelmed with emotion. Overwhelmed is not too strong a word. Dr. Timothy Keller points out that our English translations do not do this phrase justice when it says that Jesus was deeply moved. The Greek word implies much more than silent tears. Keller says, this verse contains a Greek word that means to bellow with anger. Jesus is absolutely furious. He is bellowing with rage. He is roaring. Jesus is looking squarely at our greatest nightmare, the loss of life, the loss of loved ones, and of love, and he's incensed. What does this tell us? Well, first, that death is not God's plan. Something is profoundly wrong with our world. The presence of death is not something people who love God should view with sanctified passivity. It flies in the face of all that God intended and desires. Jesus saw Lazarus' condition differently than those mourners around him, but he did not view it impassively. He hated it. God hates it. Second, God is not unmoved by our pain. God has not kept himself distant, but personally stepped into space and time to fix what is wrong. In the raising of Lazarus, there is a glimpse of what his big plan is. God was not content to let what was broken in his world stay that way, but chose to engage in the most personal way possible to put an end to it. While Lazarus' raising from the dead was joyous, it was not permanent. In fact, John tells us that the hypocritical religious leaders were so angry at the positive press this miracle generated for Jesus that they actually started plotting for ways to kill Lazarus. Poor Lazarus. You can't win for losing. And in the jealousy and plotting, we see the deeper thing that is broken in God's world. It is the pride of the human heart. Fortunately, as far as we know, their plotting ultimately did not harm Lazarus. But at some point, Lazarus did die again. God's plan was not complete. It was just a glimpse of what he was up to. For that final plan to be realized, Jesus himself would undergo death. Not a quick, easy death, but a protracted one, filled with suffering at every level, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. A death, the anticipation of which literally traumatized him, and yet he willingly went to it. Why? In the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, verse 2, it says that he did it for the joy that was set before him. That is why he endured the cross. Part of the joy Jesus looked to was the knowledge that death, that thing which caused him to bellow with rage at the tomb of his friend, would be conquered. The brokenness of the human heart would be granted a path to healing. There is mystery here, yes. But if the resurrection is true, then the mystery is to be embraced. For me, the compelling historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ was critical in my return to faith. In fact, I would say that if you don't consider yourself a believer, but you're open to seeking, I would submit that this is the key thing to investigate. If you need help with that, it'd be my honor, in honor to Jacquie, to give you a book to help you on that journey. I think it's that central. The resurrection. There is mystery here to be sure, but why would that surprise us? Quantum physics intrigues me. I've read physicist Richard Feynman's classic book, 6 Easy Pieces, and others. And trust me, understanding the world of the subatomic is far from easy. The most brilliant minds repeatedly throw up their hands and say, we see it, but we have no idea really how it works. The God of quantum physics, the one who designed the most intricate foundations of our material world, stepped into our world in the person of Jesus to solve a problem far more profound than the movement of atoms. The whys may go beyond our ability to grasp, but the who and the what is right before our eyes and open for investigation. Jesus made a bold claim. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He who believes in me will never die. And then he died. But then he rose. The claim is that he is alive today. Many of us here can attest to the experience of finding God's living presence evidencing itself in our lives in unexpected ways. Jesus used the tomb of Lazarus to present to us a microcosm of his grand plan. Death is still present, but for those who have befriended Jesus, who follow him, it does not have the final say. We are right to grieve. Jesus grieved. Death is evil. But the Apostle Paul reminds us that we do not grieve as those who have no hope. Jacquie has not been defeated by death. She has been rescued by the one who overcame it. I believe this to the core of my being. It was Jacquie's firm belief as well. She wanted me to talk about him today. Knowing all this doesn't mean that facing death is without any fear. It is an alien experience, a leap into the unknown. When my daughter Angela turned 16, she asked if we could go skydiving. Perhaps foolishly, I said yes. But I knew the odds were in our favor. We jumped with experienced jump masters who had successfully made thousands of jumps. They were living proof that the whole parachute thing really does work. Being a gentleman, I let everyone else load into the plane first, not thinking that last in is first out. As our plane neared altitude, thousands of feet above the ground, they slid the door open, and I found myself staring out into an abyss inhabited only by clouds. In that moment, all of my knowledge, research, and confidence found itself shaken before the reality of an imminent plunge into the unknown. That moment of fear didn't invalidate any of the facts that had led me to that point. And when that chute opened, I knew, experientially, that everything I had up until that moment believed only by faith was absolutely true. It was an experience of calm and beauty and freedom. For the past 10 years, I've been a chaplain with the Sheriff's Department. It's ironic that someone who at one time could bear no bad news should be in a role that far too often makes me the bearer of very bad news. And yet it is also a testament to a work God has done in my heart. The valley of the shadow of death has a passage through. Braun and Brad, Carly, Eric, Meadow, I want to encourage you that as hard as these past months have been, and as great a loss as today signifies, with God, there is a passage through. It is not the end of your heart's journey. David's confidence, and mine as well, is that if we will take God's hand, he will walk with us. He has been there before. He knows the way. He is the way. Jacquie said, talk about Jesus. The Apostle Paul, a man who at one time opposed Jesus with every fiber of his being until he met the risen Christ face to face, wrote this in one of his letters. If Christ be not raised, we are, of all men, most miserable. He's right. But if Christ is raised, then we who follow him can look at death with disgust and see beyond it with joy. A story is told from the days of the Iron Curtain that a communist official was speaking before a large outdoor audience around the time of Easter. He used the opportunity to ridicule the very idea of God and to berate those who professed faith in Christ. After the harangue had gone on for some time, he offered a challenge for anyone to contradict him. The crowd was silent until an old man slowly ascended the steps. Coming to the podium, he looked out at the great crowd, and in a loud voice he suddenly shouted, "He is risen." And 1,000 voices shouted back, "He is risen indeed." He is risen. And because he lives, Jacquie lives. And we who follow him shall live also. O death, where is your sting?